This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Celia Hatton, and on Wednesday, the 19th of August, these are our top stories. Ukrainian politics in turmoil as a senior member of President Zelensky's team is sacked and the former defense minister calls for wartime elections. Israel opens up bids to build new housing in the occupied West Bank. And joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises are cut short 6 days earlier than planned. Also in this podcast, scientists say they're stunned by how quickly children's lungs can recover in the wake of pollution restrictions. And a special global competition to find the world's strongest giant water lily.
One of our gardeners, he stood on it, and he's not one of our smaller gardeners either, 102 kilos.
We'll start in Ukraine. We often talk about Russia's war on that country, but today a lot is going on with Ukrainian domestic politics. In the last few hours, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has dismissed a deputy head of the presidential office, Iryna Mudra. No reason was given for sacking her, though that change comes shortly after anti-corruption agencies said she'd been linked to a group accused of money laundering. Those same agencies have been carrying out raids today targeting current and former lawmakers and top government officials. That's all unfolding not long after Ukraine's former defense minister, Mykhailo Fedorov, called for wartime elections, which are prohibited under the constitution. In a video posted online, he said Ukraine was facing a crisis of governance and corruption.
Democracy cannot be held hostage by Russia. We must find a lawful, safe and realistic mechanism that will allow Ukraine to restore a fully functioning democratic process, even under conditions of a long war.
Mr Fedorov was a popular defense minister. His abrupt sacking in late July led to mass protests. Many credited him with overhauling Ukraine's armed forces, tackling corruption and using data and advanced technology to improve Ukraine's standing in the war. Ukraine hasn't had an election in a while. President Zelensky's 5-year term as president was due to end in May 2024. However, elections have been suspended in Ukraine while the country's under martial law, in place since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. I asked our Ukraine analyst from BBC Monitoring, Vitaly Shevchenko, about the significance of this latest dismissal within the president's office and the corruption rates.
Ukraine has been battling corruption for a long time, and for many people, the success of this battle determines Ukraine's success on another battlefield in its war against Russia. So today, two of Ukraine's key anti-corruption agencies, they published what they said were excerpts of intercepted conversations between members of what they call a criminal group discussing ways of, laundering money to pay bribes. And they said that this group includes former and current members of parliament and also an official from the president's office. So on the one hand, it's a setback or an inconvenience at the very least for President Zelensky. But on the other hand, it shows that under his leadership, Ukraine is doing something to combat corruption.
That's interesting. It's all going on as we've also had this call from Mykhailo Fedorov, the former defense minister, calling for fresh elections. What more can you tell us about him and also that call for new elections?
He is popular. At the moment, I've had a look at opinion surveys in Ukraine, and at the moment he is Ukraine's third most popular figure. But that does not seem to be enough for Mykhailo Fedorov to force Volodymyr Zelensky's hand on any of the issues that he wants resolved, such as holding an election, despite what Ukrainian law says. And it says that as long as there's martial law, you can't hold elections. Mykhailo Fedorov just does not have the political clout to achieve that. Even though he's shot up in popularity, he is still lagging behind Volodymyr Zelensky. And his supporters, Mykhailo Fedorov's supporters, are still rallying in Kyiv and in other parts of Ukraine. But the scale at the moment, Celia, it's nowhere near enough to pose a challenge to Volodymyr Zelensky. And also, Mykhailo Fedorov seems to be an outlier in this respect. No other prominent figure in Ukraine or an opponent of Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for fresh elections. Even Mykhailo Fedorov's supporters, they are demanding his reinstatement, not Zelensky's ouster or an election. So my prediction, if I were to go out on a limb, is that that ship has sailed and it is going to blow over.
Next, to the Middle East, and in particular, what's going on in the occupied West Bank. Almost 500,000 Israelis live there, and all Israeli settlements there are considered illegal under international law. And now, Israel has just opened up bids for the construction of more than 1,000 new homes east of Jerusalem. Yolande Nell is our correspondent in Jerusalem.
This is an area that is called E1. It's just to the east of occupied East Jerusalem and close to another large Israeli settlement in the West Bank called Mal Adamim. And the reason this is so important for Palestinians, why the international community has really for years, tried to get Israel to keep any plans to develop there on hold, is because it really disrupts the contiguity of the West Bank. It makes a kind of large Israeli development between Ramallah and Bethlehem, and it sort of bisects the West Bank. So that is why, really, for about 3 decades, Israel has shelved plans to develop there. That changed last year when the far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, who also has responsibilities for setting Israeli government policy in the West Bank, he announced that there would be 3,500 new settler homes that would be developed in that area. And he said he was acting in response to various countries, including the UK, recognising a state of Palestine. Now, what has happened since then is that there have been attempts by Palestinian Bedouin residents of that so-called E1 corridor and Israeli NGOs, including Peace Now, NGOs against occupation, really to try to stop or delay the implementation of this, the opening of construction tenders, which of course is the big step. But what's happened in the past day is that the government has put out, despite that active court process going on, tenders for half of the houses. And the way it's constructed, the deal that could happen would mean that contractors could sign before the Israeli elections, which are due at the end of October. Once contracts are signed with contractors, it's much more difficult for any future government to try to stop this process from happening.
Yolande, what's the significance of the timing of all of this? We have to note that Israel is planning to have elections in late October.
That's right, and I think this government wants to do as much as possible to create what they call facts on the ground before those elections happen, because if you look at the polls at the moment, they indicate that the Prime Minister's Likud party and his coalition parties are not on track to keep power. So they want to kind of, protect what they would see as being their legacy. And this Israeli government has authorised 104 settlements in the past 3.5 years, with all settlements being illegal under international law. There's been a surge in settler violence in the West Bank. We saw that last week with a lot of focus on Kusra, this Palestinian village south of Nablus, where 2 Palestinian families have been besieged in their homes by a group of settlers. And that remains ongoing until now. Those families still are unable to move, but they're trapped by the settlers there.
Meanwhile, the conflict in Gaza has taken a huge toll on those inside the territory. The health ministry there says more than 70,000 Gazans have died since the conflict began. More than 1,200 of those who died were killed in Israeli strikes in Gaza since a ceasefire was announced last October. Many others are still missing, presumed dead. Israel does not allow journalists free access to the territory. Our correspondent John Donison has this report from Jerusalem.
In Gaza, so much has been lost. More than 70,000 lives. Hundreds of thousands of homes. And then, there are the missing. Ahmed al-Madhoun was 21 when he was last seen alive. The young man, who has Down syndrome, disappeared in May 2025 after popping to the shop. His family say Ahmed was loved by everyone and always joking around. For his parents, Majdia and Nidal, it's the not knowing that's hardest.
I haven't lost hope. Whether I find him alive, find him dead, find him buried, if they just tell me here he is, then I will truly be at peace.
Bodies are being recovered from under the rubble all the time. This month, a mass funeral for more than 100 people killed in an Israeli strike in 2023, but only now being laid to rest. It's feared thousands more bodies are still to be discovered. Ahmed may well be dead, but there's another reason why Gazans go missing. Ida Al-Drimli shows us a picture of her son, Mahmoud. He too disappeared in 2024. Ida feared he'd been killed, but then this summer a photo emerged on social media showing 2 Israeli soldiers posing with a Palestinian prisoner, blindfolded and bound. The family believes it's Mahmoud.
My heart was torn into two when I saw the photo. I was relieved that my son was okay, but at the same time, how can they humiliate him and other prisoners like him?
We asked the Israeli prison service about Mahmoud. They said they had no record of holding him. The Israeli military declined to comment. In Jerusalem, I meet Tal Steiner, an Israeli lawyer who works to locate Palestinians who may have been detained by Israel.
It's an open wound that doesn't heal. They have no rest, not even in knowing if their relative is dead or alive, to bring him to proper burial, not knowing where their family members are. That is really adding an insult to injury and a very difficult mental situation to be carrying for months and years.
Amid the destruction, the Red Cross estimates there are more than 5,000 people missing in Gaza. For their families, the displaced and the homeless, they're still not able to grieve.
The air that we breathe has a huge impact on our health. Unfortunately, we can't choose the quality of that air. And if you live in an urban area, more often than not, that air will be polluted. 6 years ago, London became the first city to bring in what's called an Ultra Low Emission Zone. All vehicles, including passenger cars and motorbikes, have to comply with strict emission targets. Drivers of higher polluting vehicles have to pay a daily fee or face fines. Now comes the first evidence of the impact that those changes have had on the health of a group of children. Our reporter Nick Miles has been looking into this.
What Queen Mary University have done, they took 3,000 children. They compared 1,500 in London, where there had been a reduction in these emissions over the last 5 years, and they compared them to people in a town called Luton, a relatively small town where there hadn't been much pollution in the past. And the people have been talking about it as a stunning result, really. Well, let's listen now to one of the researchers, Chris Griffiths.
The children in London, before the ULEZ was introduced, had smaller lung volumes compared with the Luton children, and then as air quality improved, we saw acceleration of lung growth in the children in London relative to those in Luton, so that after only 4 years, the measure that we was using was forced expiratory volume in 1 second. So after only 4 years, they'd caught up the lost lung growth that they'd experienced from prior exposure to pollution. So this is an astonishing finding.
So what impact might this report have?
Well, you just got to look at the impact that particularly strong cases have had in the past. There was one case of a 9-year-old girl who died from an asthma attack. She was living next to a very, very busy road in London. And for the first time, the coroner put on her death certificate the cause of air pollution. And that had a huge impact. It brought in some of the ULEZ legislation that we're seeing now. What perhaps we may well see, and what a lot of the authors of this report are saying to me, is that we really do need this result, this very, very graphic result of lungs coming back to life, if you like, of young children. We need that to actually give the political will a little bit of a bolster, because there has been a lot of opposition to these ULEZ over the last 5 years. It's expensive for people. A lot of people see it as a tax on the poor, people who can't afford particular cars that are much more modern. So, what is the hope for the future? Helen Wood is another member of this study.
I'm not a policymaker, I'm just a scientist, but I would hope that our policymakers and our elected politicians would look closely at this evidence that we've produced, because it's an important study, it's a very big study, and it's the first study to show an improvement in lung growth associated with a reduction in air pollution following a public health intervention.
And politicians around the world, she hopes, as well, because there are 200 cities in Europe alone that have got these kind of low emission zones in. They're also in place in some Chinese cities and Singapore and elsewhere. And people will hopefully look at these reports and say, look, it does have an impact on people's health. And when politicians are looking at these cost-benefit analyses of the pressure of perhaps keeping down costs against people's health, they will come down on the side of people's health more often than they have in the past.
Still to come in this podcast, Christmas Island locals wake up to a surprise as debris from a SpaceX Starship floats off the coast.
Looked a bit closer and then realised it was a rocket, a space rocket.
Next to South Korea, and an announcement that the joint military exercises with the United States will be cut short and finish 6 days earlier than planned. This comes just days after President Trump said he wasn't happy with U.S. participation in the drills. He described them as being costly and hostile towards North Korea. I heard more from our South Korean correspondent, Jake Kwan.
Well, this is a major exercise that happens every year, and it is between the United States and South Korea. And this year, some 18,000 South Korean troops were to participate, as well as, troops from around 12 countries around the world. These are America's and South Korea's allies participating. And then what we are hearing is that this 11-day exercise will be cut in half. So this Friday will be the last day as the Americans withdraw from the exercise after having done only the first half of it. And this is a training exercise that has been done nearly every year. There was a time that Mr. Trump had suspended it in 2018 for the sake of currying favor with Pyongyang, but it was reinstated in 2022. And like that time, this is training that takes months to prepare, and it is really unprecedented. It would be cut abruptly, like what we've seen today. And it is really a symbol of South Korea's alliance and America's commitment to protecting South Korea from possible adversaries.
Jake, why is Donald Trump citing the U.S. relationship with North Korea right now? Are there developments in that relationship?
Well, it's difficult to understand exactly what prompted Mr. Trump to focus on North Korea suddenly. He claimed that he has a great relationship with Kim Jong-un, and this is partly why he is suspending the exercise with South Korea. But we haven't seen any, for example, letters or communication happening between the two countries. We haven't heard anything from North Korea yet, any response to what President Trump has claimed. So, it is difficult to say exactly why now, but some of the observation has been that, Mr. Trump is currently having some difficulty ending the war with Iran, and maybe he's looking for a win by, moving some attention back to North Korea. He had that unprecedented, a very historic meeting with Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader, back in 2018. And perhaps he is trying to restart some of that. But at the same time, if you look at the same post, he does talk about some frustration and disappointment with South Korea not helping him out in the Iran war. So some of us are also seeing it as a punishment of South Korea.
What does this mean for the U.S. relationship with South Korea in terms of trade or diplomacy?
Well, I think there is this concern in South Korea that what used to be a very separate issue of security, American commitment to South Korea, and the South Korea's trade with the United States. It is all being mixed up in under the Trump administration. And for South Korea, they will try their best to kind of navigate this issue, but they're trying to see the silver lining, because for South Korea, they have been asking Mr. Trump to speak to Kim Jong-un, and it seems to be heading that way, possibly.
To Somalia now. It's been grappling with decades of instability and the ongoing violent insurgency by the militant al-Shabaab group, as well as prolonged droughts and severe flooding. On top of that, it's now facing cuts to its aid budget and rises in fuel and fertilizer costs because of the conflicts in Ukraine, Iran, and the Middle East. Now, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, is warning that nearly 1.9 million children are expected to suffer from malnutrition in Somalia this year. Nearly 500,000 of those will have severe acute malnutrition, the deadliest form of malnutrition. Anne Soy spoke to UNICEF's global spokesperson James Elder, who's in Somalia.
In the first 6 months of this year, we've seen a 50% increase versus last year of girls and boys, babies being admitted to stabilisation centres with complications. And why? It's simple, because when you have fewer facilities, you have longer journeys for mums and their babies. And longer journeys means later treatment, and later treatment means more severe illness and more preventable death, to be perfectly honest. And we're seeing aid cuts close doors to healthcare. They're shutting down those nutrition services, and they're just pushing everything that kids need, water, education, further and further out of reach.
How important are those services that you're talking about that are closing down now? Because this is a country that has been in crisis for such a long time.
Yeah, they're everything. I met a boy yesterday, Abdullah. He's a teenager. He wanted to be a mechanic, right? He was always tinkering with machinery in his village, and Al-Shabaab noticed this, and they offered him work and training as a mechanic. Now, he had no opportunity. He was desperate to support his widowed mum. He took it. It was a lie, right? He was thrown into the battlefield. He tried to escape. He was caught. He was eventually wounded in battle, and he was captured by government forces. Now, again, go back before these aid cuts really bit. And UNICEF, we supported, more than 160 children who'd been in those armed groups, enrolled in training centres, electrics, mechanics, cooking. They got starter kits that helped them start their own business. They got jobs, or they, as I say, created small businesses. Now, aid cuts mean for a boy like Abdullah, no starter kit, no kickstarts.
A 52-metre-long SpaceX rocket has been drifting off the coast of the remote Christmas Island, some 1,500 kilometres off the coast of Western Australia. The spacecraft was launched in Texas in late July and released 20 satellites before the upper part of the rocket re-entered the atmosphere and landed in the ocean. Engineers from Elon Musk's SpaceX have now retrieved the rocket and are analysing it. But that initial recovery operation was hampered by rough seas. Among the locals who went to have a look was David Watchorn, chair of Christmas Island's Tourism Association.
I just drove to work one morning in my 2-minute commute on Christmas Island, pulled up at our diving centre, scuba diving centre, got out of the car and looked out to what I thought was some ships, which are quite common. Looked a bit closer and then realised it was a space rocket, just out at sea that was being towed. I was able to get my crew together. We got the boat off the jetty and went out to have a look.
Alice Gorman is a space archaeologist at Flinders University in Adelaide. She spoke with Kasha Madeira about the rarity of this kind of event.
It's pretty rare. Normally these rockets break up before they reach land or sea intact. And normally a lot of space junk simply burns up in the atmosphere, so people don't even realise that it's coming in every day. So to see a whole rocket of this size floating intact in the ocean, a pretty amazing sight.
So is it a mistake that it didn't burn up and break apart?
It was intended to land upright to test the feasibility of sending something reusable back from orbit. So this was all part of the plan, but it was a test launch. So if something had gone wrong, that was kind of also expected. But normally the impact of coming through the atmosphere and then hitting the ocean, it often breaks rockets apart. So it's extraordinary that this one landed whole. It didn't sink. It didn't release any toxic fuel into the environment. So it's a pretty good result for SpaceX.
We're hearing more and more about this kind of space junk that is incredibly damaging even tiny little particles. Should we be concerned about having something this size land back on Earth?
Something this size is not going to be launched that frequently for a while, but the intention is Elon Musk is envisaging a launch of the Starship, on a daily basis. So if they perfect that reusable return to Earth technology, that's great for the Starship. But we're going to see more spacecraft re-entering from orbit, and the sheer number of the anticipated spacecraft means that more parts will survive intact to Earth, usually parts of the fuel system. So we do have an increased risk that people or property or environmental harm might happen.
What can the scientists learn from this then?
From this Starship re-entry, one of the key things is how the heat shield performed. So that's all the ceramic tiles that you can see on the outside. Some of them definitely burnt up when it re-entered, but a lot of them are still present. The Starship is going to be used to actually send people, humans, to and from the moon. So how that heat shield performs is absolutely critical to their ability to survive coming back to Earth. So this is what the scientists are going to be particularly interested in now, how that heat shield survived.
And finally, a competition to find out how much weight a giant water lily can bear. Unbelievably, these plants are strong enough for a grown person to stand on. About 40 gardens around the world are taking part this year, including the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, here in London. Alex Summers is curator of living collections at Kew. He's been speaking to my colleague Emma Barnett.
We do it for a very good reason, which is celebrating the majesty and diversity of the plant kingdom. And any route we can get out there to do that, it is fantastic. So in the case here, the water lily way off, across about 40 botanic gardens and zoos globally, we all grow these large water lilies, and they have these rigid air pockets in them, and that allows them to carry an enormous amount of weight. In the sense of what we've done here at Kew, obviously one of our gardeners, he stood on it, and he's not one of our smaller gardeners either, 102 kilos. So maybe we'll win across that network of botanic gardens.
The competition takes place across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, and this year's heavyweight champion of water lilies will be announced on August 28th. And that's it for this edition of the Global News Podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, our contact details are below. I'm Celia Hatton. Goodbye.